All right, what's up, everybody? How are you all doing? This is Sean Patterson, and we are on the Patterson podcast. We have for our inaugural episode a very special guest in the scientific community. His name is Dr. Darren Lipomi. He is from the University of Rochester Chemical Engineering Department, and we are just going to ask him a few questions about his life and then a little bit about his research. Dr. Lee Pomey has a YouTube channel and he's basically viral when you consider his niche. Um, and so we are very happy to have him here for our inaugural guest. And so, Dr. Lupomi, great to have you on the podcast.
Great to be with you, Sean. Thanks for the invitation.
Yes, sir. And so, can you tell us a little bit about your background as a student at Boston University and then Harvard University, and what it was like making that transition from undergraduate to grad school? Further, was it here that you got into your research on semiconductors, or have you always had an interest in them from an early age on?
There's a lot there. So if I forget part of the question, go ahead and remind me. So
Yes, sir.
I started out in growing up in a town, Hilton, New York, which is northwest of Rochester, and I was a huge nerd. I spent a lot of time building Lego sets and watching Star Trek and programming kind of baby computer games. But in high school, I took chemistry and I really enjoyed my chemistry classes. So I went to Boston University and for some reason, I didn't apply in chemistry. I thought I wanted to be pre med. So I thought biomedical engineering would have been a better major. But I dropped out of biomedical engineering. I changed my major to first anthropology, long story, and then
Wow.
to biochemistry, and then straight up chemistry, and then added a minor in physics. Around that time, I started working in a lab with a professor, James Panic, doing organic synthetic chemistry, so chemistry of molecules that could be used as medicines, perhaps. Then I applied to PhD programs. And in chemistry, usually you don't apply to a master's program. You usually apply directly to a PhD program, at least for kind of the top 50, top 100 programs in the United States. You apply directly to the PhD program. And that was at Harvard. And I worked in the lab of a very famous chemistry professor, George Whitesides, and his work focused. I shouldn't say focused because he did a lot of different things. And one of those things was nanofabrication engineering. And so I worked on a project in making small structures for solar cells and chemical sensors and potentially biosensors. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I got my interest in nanostructures, in organic semiconductors, kind of combining these interests. And I'd be happy to develop any parts of that story that you want.
Nice. So basically, I watch your lectures, and so would you say that you've got experience in all the applications that you're teaching about, or not really based on that synopsis of your career?
One of the funny things about one of the funny things about teaching is that we have the we kind of give the impression that we're experts in everything that we're talking about, but there's often a scenario in which, say, this up here is the level that we're talking, and then this is the level at which we have depth about what we're talking. And so if I'm talking about, like, maybe kind of Newtonian mechanics or something. I have a lot of depth there. And then maybe organic chemistry, I have a lot of depth. But then we start talking about maybe, let's say, rotational motion, which is maybe a hard part of Newtonian mechanics, and maybe I'm not so strong there. So then maybe there's not a lot of depth. So if a student asks a question in that area, I might not be able to answer many questions. That might be what I know about the topic, might be what I'm putting on the board. and
Right.
and so we read a lot of books and papers, but we don't necessarily work in all the areas that we teach.
Interesting. So you have a YouTube channel where you teach polymer chemistry and nanoengineering and discuss topics in academia. How does it feel to be a pioneer of the modern sciences, utilizing modern technology to spread scientific literacy to the masses? Further, what inspired you to take on this monumental task of breaking down complex topics into such understandable language?
Well, thank you very much for the kind words, that it's understandable language. I really appreciate that, and that's something that I work hard on. I've always been somebody who enjoyed being on stage. When I was a little
Oh,
kid, I used to have this video camera called the PXL 2000, which was a camera that recorded 10 minutes of black and white video on an audio cassette tape. And so it had such a high data rate, it would just spin and spin and spin, and it would record this video on audio tape, which was crazy, and it was a kid's toy, and that was the greatest present that I ever got. But it probably only worked for like a year or something before it stopped working. And I would make movies. Like, I made a Star Trek parody with my friends. I did little stop motion animation kinds of things, and maybe through high school and so on, I used to be in student leadership roles. Like, I was president of the marching band. I know I'm really such a cool guy, right? I was like
yeah,
president
that's
of
really
the
cool.
of the marching band and did model UN and stuff. So I was often speaking in front of people. I was always nervous doing it, but I always sought out those opportunities. And so when I became a professor, what I found is that I really enjoyed teaching. I really enjoyed being up in front of people. But after a few years of teaching the same courses, I really got bored by teaching the same material over and over again. Not really the material so much, but teaching using the same words, the same analogies, the same everything. So I'm like, all right, 1 year, this is 2017, I'm just going to record everything and use those videos to show to next year's class so that I can use the actual class period to do problems and group design exercises and talk about real world examples and really interact with the students, as opposed to me just talking with my back to the to the class while I'm writing on the board. And so I recorded all those lectures. There may be like there are 3 courses that I recorded that year that are about 30 lectures each, 25 to 30 lectures each. Sometimes I recorded supplemental videos. And so that's the academic content on my channel. In parallel to the academic content, I was also the director of the faculty coordinator of our graduate student and postdoc talk series when I was still at UC San Diego. And we would talk about all kinds of issues important to research, but not something that would be covered in a class. Like, how do I file for intellectual property? Like, how do I get a patent? How do I interact with the media? How do I write about my results? How do I talk about my results? How do I generate new ideas when I have no new research ideas? What are some of the ways to get the juices flowing? And so I recorded several of these talks and I put them up on my YouTube channel alongside the academic coursework content. And originally, the purpose was just to give my students who couldn't make it to the class, or couldn't make it to the seminar, or in the case of the academic coursework, maybe I could use those in like the flipped classroom, active learning methodologies that I mentioned, where you use the class time for other stuff. But then
Right.
people from outside started watching, and I found that the community that was kind of engaging with this material was really supportive. I have the best YouTube commenters in the world. They're they they they're excited and curious and grateful, and I don't get a lot of like the I don't know,
The
the scorn, or
backlash.
right,
Right. You're
that's
right.
the the flaming kind of flamer spam that shows up on some YouTube comment threads. And
I
so
think
I
it's
I
because it's
got
esoteric information that people really like. That's what makes it so fun because not many people know about nanoengineering and polymer chemistry. And so, I mean, even in universities, not every chemistry program has polymer chemistry or
right.
nanoengineering.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so I think the polymer class got to be the one that's kind of most watched, and I'll have people tell me when I go to the Materials Research Society conference or American Chemical Society conferences that their first polymer course was my YouTube channel. So I'm really excited about that. And then the nanoengineering course actually led to my writing this book. So I basically took all my lecture notes and I put them all in here. And then this what I was allowed to do by the publisher is put QR codes at the beginning of every chapter, so that leads to another series of videos that kind
oh,
of
wow.
goes through the key points of each chapter. So I'm really happy with the synergy between the video content and the written content. And then there's also the podcast too, and the podcast is what I consider to be kind of the best YouTube videos, and especially the stuff that doesn't or that can be appreciated without the visuals. And so I put those on the podcast.
Nice. And what can we expect in the book that's not in the lectures necessarily?
There's a lot of detail in the book that's not in the lectures, but there is also some stuff in the lectures that isn't in the book. Um, the main thing is the problem sets at the end of each chapter. So if you really want to learn the material, we have the problems. And then I think I did a better job on the artwork um, in the book than I did on the board, just because I painstakingly drew all of these drawings. I actually did them on my see if I can find a good example. Yeah, I actually did them on my iPad. So like
Oh, wow.
they're hand drawn images, and so yeah, there's and I think the explanations I really tried to hone. Right, it wasn't just me talking at the board. I got to spend 10 times the amount of time like at my computer screen. Like, that's not the best way to explain it, this is better. And so I think it's really kind of the distilled wisdom.
Cool. And so basically, since 2017, you had that spark that just made you wanna that just made you wanna like revamp your entire curriculum,
Yeah.
and then you all of a sudden you just blow up on the internet.
Well, I don't know, blow up, but maybe I guess for people in my niche, it's a pretty good following. I'm at almost 18,000 subscribers with a few million views overall. But yeah,
Congrats.
it really did allow me to engage with my live students in a more in a more immersive way. So you can picture, like, everyone's been to one of those classes where, whether it's high school or college or whatever, where the instructor is just talking to the board. Basically,
Right.
in all those sound waves, they're just reflected sound waves off the board, and there's not really much engagement, right? So if you can just extract that and give that to the students ahead of time, and also you can do closed caption for deaf and hard of hearing students, which is harder to do in a live environment. You can pause it and go back and put questions in the comment section. Like, it's quite a useful medium. But of course, the Khan Academy folks have been doing that for a long time, as well as Crash Course, which is a great internet resource. Mine is much, I would say, less polished, but I think people appreciate the authenticity.
Exactly. Yes. The actual you being in the classroom, very fun to watch.
Thank you.
When- Where they have the students have to ask the questions, very cool. And so, apart from researching, what do you enjoy doing in your spare time? I saw an episode where you were swimming. Is that an interest of yours? How do you
Yeah,
find to sit in shape while balancing your multifaceted lifestyle?
I would say the my biggest hobbies. I certainly spend the most time exercising out of all of my hobbies, exercising and music. I do. I try to exercise every morning. That's either uh, really running, swimming, or lifting weights, or but I also, because I have a pretty busy schedule, I try to do things like I'll park away from my office and then run to my office. I have a standing desk at work. Like, there's my chair, so I'm like standing right now. Um, I will sometimes like squeeze in like calf raises while I'm reading something on the screen, or like
That's so
squats or
funny.
something. And I don't know, I might look silly doing it, especially while I'm waiting with my daughter to for the school bus to come in the morning. That, like, who's that dude who who's like bobbing up and down? And the other thing I do is, in California, I didn't have a yard, but in Rochester, I have a yard. So doing um, I like doing yard work as a means of exercise. And so I will intentionally make things more difficult for me. Like, I know this is kind of like a dude bro thing, but it's kind of a life hack that works. It's like,
True.
you can wear like a weighted vest when you're doing normal
Oh my
tasks
God, the
as a
weighted
means of like
vest, bro.
staying
The
fit.
weighted
But
vest.
I don't have a ton of like time. So when I like that's that's what I'll do. And I don't know. People tell me I don't look 41, and I'm happy. I'm happy to take
Nice.
that compliment. So yeah, I feel better. I feel like I'm more creative. I feel better about myself when I exercise. So yeah, I have in other stuff, music. So I play the trombone and I play the piano. And since moving back to Rochester, because we have a really amazing music school here called the Eastman School of Music, which I actually applied to when I was in high school for college, but I didn't get in to for music school. But now I'm like friends with the trombone faculty over there, and
Nice.
I've started taking lessons again with Lisa Albrecht, who's the second chair trombonist in the Rochester Philharmonic, but she used to be the assistant principal in the New York Philharmonic, and has worked for ages in. I don't want to age her, but she's worked for a long time in the trombone community, and it's really an honor to get to study with her. So, yeah, that's another serious hobby of mine.
That's really cool.
Oh yeah, and Trombone Shorty opened the Super Bowl, which was really thrilling to get our instrument on the in the national stage. That was a real thrill.
Nice. That's cool. So, would you say that being a practitioner of music helps your science at all?
100%. I think there's a discipline to studying science that is easier to achieve if you've done something else that requires a level of discipline. Mainly, it's keeping distraction out. It's knowing how to do things that are hard for you as a means of getting better for you. Let's take this as an example. Like, it kind of sucks to learn something new because like a new skill because you're not good at it at first. And so one of the reasons why a student doesn't get better in their scientific or math studies is because they kind of avoid the problems that are like the problems in the back of the book that are going to make them sweat. And but you really have to kind of do those things that you don't know. Ideally, you have the solutions manual around so you can help yourself move forward. But that's the way you really form you know, new neurological connections in your brain. Similarly, in music, one of the reasons why I play the piano a little bit too, and one of the reasons why I'm not as good as I could be as for somebody who's been playing as long as I have is because I only play the stuff that I sound good playing, and that's like 99% of my time. So and I'm okay with that because I'm not like a professional. But if I were really trying to get better, I would play something new like every day that stretched my skills. And so that's what I'm trying to do now, sort of relearning how to play the trombone after 23 years of not playing a single note, is that I'm trying to kind of learn from the ground up. Like, how would I have learned being as, nominally wise as I am now? How would I go about learning a new skill?
Now, let's dive into your research if that's cool.
Sure.
Can you give us some intelligence on the processes involved with semiconductors? From what I understand, they are used in applications ranging from medical applications to robotics to aerospace, enabling faster processing of commands we give them.
Sure. So a semiconductor has is better at conducting electrons than an insulator like wood or plastic, but it's not as good at conducting electrons as a metal like copper or silver. And the key to the importance to the technological importance of a semiconductor like silicon or germanium or any number of other semiconductors, even beta carotene in carrots is a semiconductor, believe it or not. But anyway, is that their conductivity can be modulated by an external stimulus. So if you apply an electric field to a semiconductor, you can make it more conductive. If it's in a device, you apply an electric field and you can draw charges into the semiconductor, and that can make it more conductive. If you shine light at a semiconductor, you can make it more conductive. If you do some chemistry on a semiconductor, like you either oxidize or reduce the semiconductor, you can make it more conductive. And so what you can do is generate these complex devices where you can gate the conductivity with these external stimuli. Let me give you an example. A transistor is one of the most fundamental types of semiconductor devices. And a transistor is just a switch that you can turn on and off using electric fields. So you might have a transistor made of a semiconductor, and there are two electrodes there. There are two contact pads. There's a source and the drain. And then below the semiconductor, you have a gate. And that gate is like turning the switch on and off, which allows electricity through between the source and the drain. But the voltage applied to that gate, the electric field that emanates from that gate, could be the output of another transistor. So that transistor controls this transistor, controls this transistor, could control two or three other transistors. And that's how you generate the ability, that's how you build up the ability to do math and ultimately to put images on a screen and ultimately to create the internet and calculate quantities that correspond to images and video and sounds and so forth. So that's the power of a semiconductor. Another example of semiconductors is solar panels. So a solar panel has two types of semiconductor. One is better at transporting positive charges, so you call that p-type, and one is better at transporting negative charges, so you call that n-type. There are differences between different types of semiconductors. So silicon, they're not actually charges. They're either extra electrons or the absence of electrons, but in organic semiconductors, they're formal charges that it's easier to move around if it's n-type or p-type. Anyway, there's some subtleties, but suffice it to say that when you smush these two types of silicon semiconductor together and light comes in, you can get you knock an electron loose, and that's called an excited electron. And then what you leave behind is a positively charged hole, and that electron and hole will be separated by an electric field because you have this p and n type silicon next to each other. That asymmetry allows the positive and negative charges to go to opposite sides of the device, where if you hook up some wires, that electron and that hole will recombine in a circuit to power some device. And that's another example. There are types of biosensors where you could also gate, you can modulate or change the conductivity of a semiconductor if it is bonded to by a biomolecule like a virus or an antibody or something, and then that change in conductivity will tell you if the virus is present.
Do you think that we have technologies that we could be using, but we just don't have the semiconductors for that technology to be active?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there are some cases, let's take solar cells, for example, where silicon has a really nice band gap. It's a very low band gap. But the problem is there's a peculiarity about silicon where it's not very good at absorbing photons. It's not very good at absorbing light. So while it has something called a low band gap, which means it's easy for energy to come in to excite electrons over that band gap, which is what you need to generate charges, you need so much of the material that sometimes it just costs too much money to make. So ideally, you'd have a really thin layer, like 100 nanometers, which is 100 billionths of a meter, and that would absorb all the light instead of 100 micrometers, which is about what you need for silicon. And so that's an example where a better semiconductor might actually make a technology better. Now, there are examples of thin film semiconductors that are very efficient at absorbing light, like amorphous silicon as opposed to semicrystalline silicon. So semicrystalline silicon is like little grains of stuff, or not polycrystalline silicon is little grains of silicon, whereas amorphous silicon is almost like a silicon glass, but that glassiness actually makes it more absorbing, which is pretty cool. The problem is it's not very environmentally stable. So one of the things that one finds is that there are rarely like pure solutions. You often have trade-offs as opposed to pure solutions. The area of semiconductors that I work most closely in is in organic semiconductors. And the organic semiconductors, it doesn't mean that they're grass fed and pesticide free. It means that they're based on carbon. And they these are some organic semiconductors are really familiar to us, like chlorophyll and beta carotene. These are brightly colored organic molecules that can also transport charge. It's even possible to make a solar cell out of chloroform and beta or chlorophyll and beta carotene. Believe it or not, it's not a very efficient one, but it works. So one of my research goals is to be able to make these kinds of organic solar cells more environmentally stable, to make them more cheap, to make them more physically robust. So, my particular lab, a lot of labs work in organic solar cells, but my lab's sort of claim to fame in this area is that we figured out ways to make them more flexible and stretchable and adhere better to the other materials in the device.
Nice. So you're more focused on mechanical properties and
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, mechanical properties of organic semiconductors. That's kind of how I got tenure, which is what they give to professors after they decide that they're not going to fire them. And you get
nice.
so that was my primary research topic for my tenure package in 2016.
And so I got a final question with that, which kind of goes into the last question. With the advent of super fast semiconductors and the rise of artificial intelligence, do you foresee a world will become virtually dependent on electronics based on their ability to enhance our quality of life? I.e., do you think they will proliferate the advent of other technologies once we're able to crack the code on semiconductors, thereby making us dependent on them?
I think that dependence on artificial intelligence has already kind of happened.
Mhm.
It's very useful to be able to talk to GPT-4o and ask it and bounce ideas off of it. It's like performing 1,000 Google searches all at once. It's a super efficient way to enhance our ability to do research. There are caveats right now, but I think that ultimately the solution to this will be fairly simple. I'm not a computer scientist, so I'm not going to be the one coming up with the solution. But like its ability to search the literature right now is not great, although some platforms are getting better at it. Probably by the time someone listens to this 2 years later, that problem will be solved. I think the
Right.
biggest technological hurdle with AI is that to get to human level intelligence and especially sensory motor control, things that require picking up a pen or like going into a random house and having a robot be able to fix a toilet. Like I think that's like at least 10 years off. But I think being able to do that kind of calculation requires so much energy into the calculation. They call this compute now. It requires so much compute that even just to get 10% better might take 2 or 3 times as much energy, right? And I'm not they'll always find a way to make it more efficient, and even when they do, they'll just make the tasks more difficult, right? So that you still
Right.
end up burning the same amount of energy. But I think energy availability is going to be a big issue for doing tasks that are 2 or 3 times more complicated than what they can do now. And the other thing I would say is that our underlying values can't really be determined by a machine. And that happens to be one of my values, that to be a human value, it has to have been created by a human. Like the value behind education is that you want to lift people up, you want to enrich their experiences, you want them to be able to provide financial security for themselves and their family and their friends and their neighborhoods. And if a computer comes by, I mean, AI says, no, I don't value those things. Well, you know, I don't know, screw off AI. That is what we value. So I think they call this, I guess, the alignment problem. And another thing that one might value is maybe you do want solutions to problems to have been created by humans or with human involvement and not entirely done by machines. Take, I don't know, take wine or whiskey or something. There are some really fine bottles. I mean, this is true for music and stuff too, but like you it is possible theoretically to do analysis to separate every component in that whiskey or wine bottle and just buy the chemicals from the Sigma Aldrich catalog and mix them together in the right proportions. And there you've got that perfect wine bottle. But if you sold it that way, no one would buy it, right? They might buy it as an interest, but they want that thing that was made in like the slow, stupid way. I mean that in the most generous way possible. Like they want that wine that has been fermented over you know however long and then aged in oak barrels for however many years and whatever, or aged in the bottle for years. Same thing for whiskey. Like a violin, maybe you can make exactly the same sound as a Stradivarius, but you can do it with some 3D printed knockoff where you've done the calculation. I think it's easier for whiskey than it is for musical instruments, but let's just say in principle you could 3D print something that was going to give you exactly the same acoustic overtone series. It was going to give you the same articulation. It was going to give you the same everything. But when you sold it, the seller would know that this is a real handmade violin, and then this one is a 3D printed thing that like took 5 minutes to make or something. And like you, even if they sounded in principle exactly the same, I think our human values would tell us that
Mm,
the legit one, the one that was made using time honored fabrication processes and woodworking and everything, would be the better one, or the one that you would actually value having. Same thing with scientific discovery, let's say.
right. I read you loud and clear.
And that's not to say that like a computer couldn't discover something that we found to be valuable, but but it's not going to be the computer telling us that that's what you should value. Like what if it comes up with some, I don't know, really like obscure kind of stupid fact about the universe, like the weight of that brick over there in that building is exactly 1058.254627 grams. Like, okay, great. You just wasted all of that like computational power on some totally trivial result. So there has to be some interface with human values in order for, I think, the result to actually be valuable.
Well, that's all my questions I have for you today.
All right. Thank you, Sean. This was really fun.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for your time today, Dr. Lipomi. And once again, everybody, this was our inaugural episode of the Patterson Podcast. Please like, follow, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next episode. Peace.